5th New York, the 10th New York are going to have a rather rude experience when Longstreet launches his counterattack. And that is what we will discuss and walk the trail for the next 90 minutes, following basically the same path as the 5th Texas. So we'll start here very soon, as soon as some of our additional people roll in. And we go. Hopefully everybody's getting a nice breather from your deep cut experience. You're going to be walking over rolling ground now for the next 3/8 of a mile through the trees until we get to Chinn, and then it opens up into a nice wide open pasture in front of the Chinn house in the full sun. And hopefully by then we'll have some little bit of wind to help us cool off a bit. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, stationed along Lewis Lane or the Groveton Road just behind you about 1/8 of a mile would be the 10th New York deployed as skirmishers. Down the slope behind you would be the 5th New York. They're in bivouac, they're camping out, kind of resting because they're in support of Hazlett's battery, as you saw as you drove in up there on the right. They had no idea, and they were not expecting to see combat. They did hear all the noise of the artillery fire at the deep cut and the repulse of Fitz-John Porter's corps. But directly away from us, about 1/2 to 3/4 a mile from the Warrenton Turnpike or Route 29, extending south, about a mile, mile and a quarter onto I-66 today. Longstreet's wing of Robert E. Lee's army, 25 to 28,000 men, have been positioned for battle since the early morning, probably around 10 o'clock on August 30th. Their orders have been to advance on a moment's notice. They've been waiting for their opportunity. With the repulse of Fitz-John Porter's corps, that opportunity has come. In this quadrant that I call Lewis Lane, Route 29, Sudley Road, that's where the visitor center is, and I-66. Right now there are 12,000 Union soldiers in this area. Just a little over 500 of the 10th New York are along as skirmishers along Lewis Lane, and 580 5th New Yorkers down here in the slope. Back towards Chinn Ridge is an Ohio Brigade under the command of Nathaniel McLean, 1,200 strong. Between him and the 5th New York is a big division under the command of John Reynolds. His immediate superior is Irvin McDowell. McDowell overreacts and sends 10,000 of those men heading due north to reinforce the Union center along what's called Dogan Ridge, or if you drive down 29 on the left, you'll see the house called Rosefield. That's where they're all heading. Totally overreacts. So when Longstreet gives the go order to advance, 28,000 Confederates and 2,200 Union soldiers stand in the way. Longstreet tells his division commanders, push for the heights of the Henry Hill, cut off the retreat crossings at Bull Run, and there will be 3. Balls Ford, Lewis Ford, and of course the famous Stone Bridge. If you can take those crossings, you'll drive the Union Army toward the northeast, where they can be destroyed, and John Pope will be defeated totally, and possibly the war will come to the end. From their starting point around the Kunda farm, extending down towards the Lewis farm to Henry Hill, is just under 2 miles. Longstreet's got 3 hours of daylight to get there. The unit that will take off will be John Bell Hood's Texas Brigade, the hardest hitting outfit in Lee's army. They are made up of the 1st, 4th, 5th Texas, the 18th Georgia, and the Hampton Legion, Wade Hampton of South Carolina. And they will lead this advance. The 1st Texas is supposed to lead along the turnpike, followed by the 4th, then the 18th, then the Hampton Legion, and bringing up the far right will be the 5th Texas. We are going to basically walk in the footsteps of the 5th Texas when we take off here for Chinn Ridge. They take off at 4 o'clock. The Texas Brigade leads out so fast that they start to develop a 1/4 to 1/2 a mile gap between the other 2 divisions of Longstreet's wing. They chase away the 10th New York, and the 5th New York, who's not expecting anything, starts to hear behind them, and as you're looking through these woods, the ruffling of feet, the shuffles, and starting to hear the screams, and then all of a sudden, the piercing rebel yell as the Texans now burst out of the woods and directly on top of the 5th New York, who have now rushed to the crest of this ridge. 150 years ago, most of this ground was wide open rolling terrain. Directly in our front and extending down there about another 500 yards would be the historic woods. Now there are private homes in this area off to the left front or to your right rear as you're looking. That's all the historic woods. Behind you, this slope and all the way to the other ridges that we'll walk is predominantly all open rolling ground. There'll be a scrub pine thicket that we'll stop at. It has a shelf or a plateau where some Union soldiers will try to make a stand. Then adjacent to the trail and extending around as we're looking this way would be the hardwood forest that belongs to the Chinn plantation place, also known as Hazel Plain. And we'll show you briefly where that hardwoods starts in. So for Colonel McLean of the Ohioans standing on Chinn Ridge, watching in horror as 10,000 Union soldiers march across his front, and he starts now to witness the destruction of the New York regiments, he can see everything. Now we can't see where he's standing, but trust me, you would in 1862, and you get to kind of feel like you're Colonel McLean wondering what has how happened. Just prior to Fitz-John Porter's attack, the Union commander here by the name of John Reynolds had personally rode forward through these trees, crossed Lewis Lane, got off his horse, crawled through the grass, through one of those long belts of woods, and he saw the final touches of Longstreet's wing being formed for battle. Cavalry starting to screen the infantry and working themselves farther and farther down. He quickly gets on his horse and rides, according to his words, pell-mell to John Pope's headquarters. Tells General Pope, you better watch out for your left. And John Pope's answer, oh, I guess not. Well, now we're going to find out, right? So that's how we're going to start. The Texans will bop out of these woods, 580 men here. They'll get hit by the 5th Texas, 18th Georgia, and the Hampton Legion. Hits them left, right, and in the center. In under 10 minutes, 300 men will be killed and wounded. The 10th New York is gone. They have broken through the ranks and are heading back towards Chinn Ridge and eventually to Henry Hill Stone House. The 5th New York tries desperately to hold on, but they're overwhelmed so rapidly, and the Texas Brigade now sets their sights on the next Union opposition, which will be a small brigade of Pennsylvanians supporting a battery under the command of Captain Karns. One piece of evidence that does occur here as we walk down this slope and we cross over Young's Branch, we'll stop as we get to the end. Sergeant James Webb, 5th New York, will turn around and run across Young's Branch, cross diagonally of the front of the Texas Brigade, heading toward Hazlett's battery to warn Hazlett that he's about to be flanked and cut off from the Union rear. For those actions, James Webb will receive the Medal of Honor. And then he will then take off and catch up with the rest of the 5th New York as they head towards the Stone House. The monuments here today are standing in direct memory of what happens to these men 150 years ago. You see what they were wearing by the folks that were standing down there and around here and who passed through. When we get around the bridge, we make a right turn and start to ascend the slopes towards Chinn. We'll make a momentary stop, and I'll read you a quote from one of the soldiers who participated in this attack. The next formal stop will be at that plateau where Captain Karns' battery. So if you're all ready to go, get yourselves ready, everybody hydrated, and then I shall lead and you shall have some fun as we walk. Right here at this turn, New York Avenue and the monuments are directly behind you. This is Young's Branch. This area all the way up to our next formal stop is completely open of cover. None of these trees would have been here in 1862. Extending all the way down from where we are in I-66, if you have good ears, you can pick it up. It is about 1.25 miles south of where we are. And about 1,100 yards that way is Route 29, the Warrenton Turnpike. Someplace in this area, when the Texas Brigade gets on the crest and starts firing at the retreating New Yorkers, this is where the 10th New York will lose their flag. The 18th Georgia overruns them, captures it around in this area right here. Now you might be thinking, if you're really into details, what about the 1st and the 4th Texas? Where are they? The 1st Texas is supposed to be leading and using the road as a guide. Well, their commander, for some reason, thinks he is too far ahead. So he stops his regiment. In fact, he is behind. Everybody else is way up here, and they will never get into the fight. They will slowly move down the Warrenton Turnpike and then eventually camp out in a little ravine. As you look off into the trees, and if you bend down, you can see how it slopes and then rises, and then it's going to drop off into a ravine. That's basically where they'll be for the rest of the fight. They're done. Not even shooting a weapon, basically. The 4th Texas will now start to catch up with everybody else. And they will move through that little ravine and that little dip that you see immediately to our left. And they were the ones that are going to go straight into the Hardin's Brigade of Pennsylvanians and Captain Karns' battery up here on the shelf. Right now, those guys, Hardin and Karns, were in the last part of Reynolds' division in the column that was moving north. McDowell stops them, turns them around, double times them back to that shelf or that plateau. So now they're in position, and they are now starting to put fire down on the Texas Brigade as where we are right now. And this is where the 4th Texas will basically take them on, and everybody else will start swinging around to the right to outflank those Pennsylvanians up on that shelf. This area right in here, it comes from Private Andrew Coates of the 5th New York. For a short time, the regiment tried to fight back the overwhelming force that was pouring in a fearful stream of destruction and death upon it. But the stream became a torrent as the right and left flanks of the enemy almost surrounded. War has been designated as hell, and I can assure you that where the regiment stood that day was the very vortex of hell. Not only were the men wounded or killed, but they were riddled. Corporal Joseph B. Polly, 4th Texas. This is after they've already assaulted up and captured the gun. They will fall back and join the 1st Texas someplace over here. Looking up the hill, he's talking about the hill behind us that we just left. A strange and ghastly spectacle met our eyes. An acre of ground was literally covered with the dead, dying, and wounded of the 5th New York Zouaves, the variegated colors of whose peculiar uniform gave the scene the appearance of a Texas hillside in spring, painted with wild flowers of every hue and color. That is the end of the New Yorkers. Whatever remnants remain and gather up with their commanding officer is Colonel Gouverneur K. Warren. Those of you might know that name from 1863, a little battle up in Pennsylvania. Gouverneur K. Warren kind of has a role. He will assemble initially only 6 men will answer the colors at the stone house. And then throughout the rest of the fighting in the evening, more men will come in, so it's a little over 150 men that will gather back with the colors under Colonel Warren. All right, everybody okay? Safety thing here. I've got myself leading with some water. I do have a volunteer bringing up the rear with water. If you're starting to feel heat, faint, whatever, get our attention. Let us know, because we are going to be confined as we walk up this trail to where the Karns' plateau would be. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you said this was open. Was this a pasture?
This would have been rolling pasture to the Chinn Plantation farm.
Okay.
Absolutely. And no evidence of what was here. Mostly cattle is what I'm guessing. The actual grain would be on the other side. That's what I'm guessing.
Now the brigade that was lost, how come they couldn't see the other brigades up ahead? The one that was behind, or I'm sorry, the regiment.
Colonel just literally just thought it was a dead one, stopped and found out he was well behind it.
It would have been much better in my own.
One of the disadvantages of being short. I can't see right there. Good? Okay. This is the military crest for the Hardin, Pennsylvania Brigade. They would have been deployed on either side of the trail, down toward a little ravine there, and then extending off in that direction. Captain Karns' battery would be sitting over here about another 150 yards, directly in the face of the 4th Texas. Coming through here, of course, will be the Georgia and South Carolinians, and the 5th Texas swinging around to the right to dislodge Hardin's Brigade of Pennsylvanians. The scrubby pine thicket starts basically on the back side of the slope and extends eastward toward Chinn, and then extends down the face of the west side of Chinn for about another 500 yards. the hardwood forest. As we walk, it's going to go over this little crest into a flat spot. To the right of that flat spot and extending maybe 500 yards is where the hardwood forest would extend, and then all the way up to Chinn Ridge. So it kind of will form, if you're looking down, the hardwood forest will form an L. We would be right about here, and it forms an L like that to the Chinn house. The scrubby pine thicket is over here. The question over here was, are there any plans to open this vista back up? Yes and no. Yes, they want to. No money. And having to get the contract let, then they have to go through public hearings and all that stuff. The intent is not to open it all up, but to create a quarter-mile vista from Chinn direct to New York Avenue. Leave the trees where they are, but just make this whole thing open, a quarter-mile corridor on either side. So, as the Texans, especially the 5th Texans, because they're the ones doing most of the heavy hitting right now, they swing around and they deliver a volley into the Pennsylvanians' left. The South Carolinians, Georgians move up this way. The 4th Texans actually fire volleys into Karns' battery and then fall back because the guns are unloading on it. There are 2 different accounts of what happens to Captain Karns. The one account that I like, oh, this is real good, I like this. The one I like says that his cannoneers began to abandon their pieces because of the overwhelming numbers, and that he personally will stay and load and fire. And then as the Texans started to close in, they start yelling at this captain to stop shooting so they don't have to kill him. Sometime around the 30-40 yard mark, Corporal Polly in his diary says he unloads on them and they cut him down. Then they swing through and they capture the guns. A more contemporary account that was discovered and written by Scott Patchen in the latest book on the fighting at Chinn says that Captain Karns was wounded, placed on a caisson, but retained command. And his cannoneers still stood to their pieces until they finally gave up and retreated, not by the first account. What I like about the first account, which was also written, and in the account comes from Corporal Polly of the 4th Texas, is that after they swing through the guns, and then they go all the way to Chinn, they see what's waiting for them on Chinn, then they fall back, they come across the mortally wounded Captain Karns. And they say, "Sir, can we take you to the rear? Let our surgeons take care of you." Captain Karns says, "I made a promise to either drive you back or die under my guns, and I have kept my promise." That's the account I kind of like, but that's from one source, and of course we need at least an additional source. Yes, sir.
Were there large numbers of heat casualties at the battle?
Yes. The actual temperature, based on Georgetown, because that's the nearest weather station, 25 miles away, is 87 degrees. Okay, that's about what we got today. We also know there was no wind. And that's evidence once we get to Chinn, because the battery that sits up there, both sides says that the American flag was hanging dead limp amongst the battery when they took it. So, no wind, about 87 degrees. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How much weight were they carrying, an average soldier?
Well, by now they are starting to shed, so they're probably down to about 30, 40 pounds, because you got a 10-pound average 10-pound musket, 30 rounds, maybe up to 60 rounds. So that adds maybe another 5. If they got the bedroll like the 5th and 10th New York are carrying, they put some stuff in there. If they got their knapsacks or a backpack, you add that on. So I give them 30 to 45 pounds, maybe 60 on the far end. Anything else? Okay, the next little stop is going to be Chinn Ridge proper. This is how we're going to approach it. We'll move through the trail. Watch how it slopes. Remember, the hardwoods will be to the right, because as the Texas Brigade swings through these woods and they see the Ohioans, they receive a volley and fall back. And then they start shifting to their right through those hardwoods. We're going to go up to the clearing of the trees at the end of Chinn and stand in the open, not all the way to the crest yet.
One more question. How much hotter would the firing the muskets and cannons have gotten the soldiers?
Very hot. Down that way, and of course that's where they formed the L that I described earlier. This is now open ground behind you, extending down the western face of Chinn Ridge. The pine thicket runs kind of at an angle, and then eventually goes out towards the northern end of this ridge. Standing right up there is the 73rd Ohio. The far left of Nathaniel McLean's brigade extending down that front. He's got 4 pieces of artillery that he is supporting. And I was asked, a gentleman that was walking with me, he was asking about time. From Kunda Farm to here, it takes the Texas Brigade 45 minutes. 4 o'clock they started. What time you got now?
4:40.
4:40. A mile at 3/4 in 45 minutes. 2 New York regiments put on the tally board, put an artillery board, a battery on the board. And now they're here. They come out, they receive the fire all along. The 5th Texas, which is the far right, is right in this area here, and then everybody else extends down that away for about another 400 yards. They receive the fire from McLean, and they fall back to a little ravine, and then they start, this is where Colonel McLean's position starts to become very, very tenuous, because 1,100 yards in that direction is Dogan Ridge, Rosefield. Along Dogan Ridge and facing west are 50 pieces of artillery, Union. 2 Confederate brigades advanced immediately following the repulse of Porter, Featherston, and Pryor. They advance across the open fields of the deep cut, through the Groveton woods. They come in the open. They see the 50 guns. They stop. They pull back to the trees. They stay there. While they are staying there, at least half of those pieces of Union artillery now turn and roll up towards the Warrenton Turnpike and start putting fire this way. That starts the Texas Brigade to start to shift to the right to get away from that fire. The next brigade that comes up is under the command of Nathan Shanks Evans, South Carolinians. They now take the spot that was just vacated by the Texas Brigade, so now they're receiving artillery, and they're also starting to receive musketry. They are now kind of holding their position. The Texas Brigade is kind of relaxing and gathering their breath because they just got a little shot at here pretty heavy by McLean. Now the rest of Longstreet's wing begins to start coming into view. Kemper's division, 3 brigades, all Virginians, is the next one in line. Beyond that, D.R. Jones, there's coming down I-66. We're not going to see them for a while because they're coming down I-66. Kemper's division would be just on the other side of that tree line right there, which is where today the movie theater is, Old Navy and Borders, which is now out of business. So they're moving through there. So that's how it sets up the terrain right now as we're ready to go. The next big assault will occur at 5 o'clock in about 15 minutes. So what we'll do, up to the 73rd Ohio position, to the Chinn Ridge parking lot, stop there, turn around, get you all orientated to the Union perspective, show you a couple pictures, and then we'll get into the really nuts and bolts of the attack and defense of Chinn Ridge. Any questions?
I do have a question for you about where.
Down the farm lane and extending this way. The next regiment in line will be the 25th, which will be about, well, we'll call it the wayside to the next little fence line that you can't see. Those tall, you might see another set of split rail fences down there. Okay, that's about that. Then there'll be the artillery, and on the other side of that, the other 2 regiments of McLean's brigade. They pushed back to Texas. They started to shift to the Ohio's left. Shanks Evans, South Carolinians come up down the face, receive the fire. They fall back. Now they're receiving artillery fire. Kemper's division beginning to arrive on the field through the trees. This man right here is Colonel Nathaniel McLean, in command of the Ohio Brigade. He is the son of a United States Supreme Court Justice. It was his father that cast the only dissenting opinion on the 1857 Dred Scott decision. That's the decision that says Africans are not people, they are property. And the federal government will use all their power to return free or escaped slaves to the South. Another man in the 73rd Ohio is this soldier right here. He will be killed a year later at a place called Gettysburg. His name is George Nixon, the great-grandfather of President Richard M. Nixon. So he'll be right in here. What is about to happen here at 5 o'clock starts the undoing of John Pope as an Army commander. The question that we got is coming up, has Pope realized Longstreet's on the field and is Longstreet attacking? He will not come out of the fog until 5 o'clock when the musketry blows up on Chinn Ridge. And then he will understand what everybody's been trying to tell him for the last day and a half. You better watch out for your left. So now, when that starts to happen, he will start to send 7,000 Union soldiers to Chinn Ridge. Some will start to go to Henry Hill. Henry Hill is in that direction, just under a quarter mile away. Chinn Ridge, all open down the front, all open down the slope this way. There will be a small 3 or 4 acre woodlot over there by the road. It comes off Sudley, right across from the visitor center, makes that little angle. Right in there will be a little open area. The Chinn Plantation home stood right there. It's called Hazel Plain. It stood until 1950 when the Park Service had to take it down. It became so structurally unsound, that's why they had to take it down for safety. That house is a witness to both battles of Manassas, because there is fighting on Chinn Ridge here during the first battle of Manassas, and that house saw both of them. So what is going to happen for poor Colonel McLean is that he is now going to get hit by a 3-pronged attack. Led by Shank Evans, South Carolinians coming out this way. The 5th Texas and the 18th Georgia will hit the 73rd Ohio. Supporting over here, just arriving on the field and only get about 2 shots off, will be an artillery battery, Union, under the command of Cooper. And they'll deploy in this area. Union reinforcements are starting to arrive. The 1st Brigade that comes into play is Zealous Towers. They took a roundabout way to get here. They're at Dogan Ridge, Rosefield. If you got your maps, you can see Dogan Ridge. Directly north of us through the gap, and those trees there, Dogan Ridge. Then they marched to the Stone House. Then they marched to Henry Hill. Then they turned around and marched this direction. And they formed line of battle down in the valley of Chinn. Down this slope here is where they will form line of battle. Their intent was to come up and extend to the left, but they do not make it because here they come. The rebel yell and hit them on 3 prongs. It crushes the 73rd, drives them into the 25th, and now you have the battery caught up here with the Union retreating, soldiers heading down the farm lane, which is this road here. The 25th jumping the fence over there, heading towards that way, starting to intermingle with Towers' brigade. For Colonel McLean, he's about to try a very difficult maneuver under fire. Change front. He's looking west with these other 2. He's now going to try to change front and turn south because Montgomery Corse's brigade of Kemper's division are deploying into battle formation behind those trees. Trees are not there. He can see them. Towers can see. McLean can see them, but they're not. That's what's the problem. The 55th Ohio, the far right, will double time up to the fence line and deploy down that fence line toward the slope. Now the combat has extremely come very close because as the Ohioans vacate and the battery here vacates, the Texans swing around so they're facing here. Evans tries to overlap the right and they are repulsed. Again, combined artillery fire coming this way and the 55th Ohio delivering well-placed volleys to drive them back and forces the Evans' people down the slope, down into the ravine, and then they go back off into this way, into the hardwoods, and they basically are pretty much done for that part of the fight. But the Brigade of Virginians under Montgomery Corse now are moving solidly across the open fields, through the outbuildings, around the house, down the slope, until they take battle formation along this fence line, with the 55th Ohio standing as truly only organized Union resistance at the next fence line over the little slope there. Down in the valley, Colonel McLean is trying to rally the remnants of his brigade, and he will fall back to another position where an artillery battery starts to arrive on the field. It's under the command of Captain Mark Lepian. That's what Towers brought over. Towers' men are now going to swing and join up on that fence line with the 55. Everybody kind of got how the flow worked there? Try to keep it simple. They're swinging around this way. Towers' men are swinging up this way. Now we got two fences become the battle lines, separated between this open ground here, no more than about 110 yards or so across the front. Questions? All right, next one's going to be the fun part, because we're going to go down about halfway on the spine of Chinn Ridge and talk about the closure rate of both forces as they come here to come to grips. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what time is those two lines formed? At what time?
Okay, 5 o'clock is when they come out here, probably around 5:30 now. They have established that. McLean, in his report, says that he will give 30 precious minutes, that his units can only stand for 30 minutes, and then he turns the fight over to Towers.
Okay.
The 55th will be the last one to come out of that line, because Towers will be fighting it, and the next brigade that comes in will bring up and extend the line further down to the west over the slope, and Towers' men basically are done for the day.
Okay.
So 5:30. Right about here and a little bit this way. The only Texas Brigade regiment that will remain in the fight, and as General Hood says, the 5th Texas slipped the bridle and he lost them. The 5th Texas is going to continue to fight all night. And some accounts say they end up all the way down at the Stone House. While everybody else is over here with the Texas Brigade camping out, bivouacking, these guys are still fighting along with everybody else down the spine of this ridge. But the fight now comes between Towers' people and the Virginians. Two accounts that are very interesting, but of course absolutely contradictory, because they're written from both sides. It says that the Virginians actually cannot advance. The Union folks stop them cold with a couple volleys, force them back through the Chinn house. Another account from the Virginian side says they came through the house, they saw the opposition, they marched to within about 50 yards, okay, that's about half the distance between, delivered a volley, and that scattered the Union side. Well, either way, it's buying time for John Pope. Either way you're doing this, it's buying time. And right now, what's happening on Henry Hill, you're going to see troops and artillery from Dogan Ridge being pulled off and starting to move towards Henry Hill and form up a defensive line along the Sudley Road. Towers' men here are going to be supported now by another brigade under the command of, excuse me here, Colt. 2 New Yorkers, 2 Pennsylvania regiments will come up and again try to extend the line left and right as you're looking this way toward that, trying to hold back the overlapping Confederate infantry. The rest of Kemper's division, the other 2 brigades who marched on by, have now stopped. Basically where they stop is Sudley Road, the community college. They turn around, they deploy, and they start to extend the line that way. What I always kind of put into mind of everybody when you're out here is keep in mind the direction of the attack. We're going north. Henry Hill is right over there, or less than a quarter-mile away. They're attacking 90 degrees out of their objective. Henry Hill is there for the taking, but the Confederate infantry that is moving down are being turned to the left and sucked into the fight here on Chinn Ridge. D.R. Jones's division, untouched, being screened by cavalry, they could push straight into Henry Hill, but they will be turned and they will come into the fight here, basically down in the valley and beyond, until they drive the last remnants off this thing. One of the interesting stories, and we don't like to make light of war, but there is a little bit of humor every once in a while that occurs during the heat of combat. When that battery of Union guns up here retreated, passing down the face of Montgomery Corse's brigade of Virginians, well, the soldiers did the right thing. They started trying to shoot this man driving this case on and try to get those ammunition shells and so forth and so on, and they're not hitting anything. The officers are getting frustrated and they start yelling, "Stop shooting at that man and shoot the horses." Well, they don't hit the horses either. Okay? If you leave here and follow the road, the farm lane, that way you'll come to a place we call Bald Hill. It's on the battle maps of the time. It's actually referred to as a position that John Pope wanted occupied. He says, send a regiment over to that Bald Hill. So that's that little hill on the other side here as you go out to your immediate left. This sergeant of the caisson stops, stands up, takes his hat off, and salutes the Confederate firing line. And for a little while, it says from the Virginians' account, they stop and they cheer the man for his bravery for running the gauntlet. And then they turn around, they come back down here and start whacking on Towers. Another interesting side that comes out, again, these are all soldiers, of course, we don't know their names. A Union soldier is shot in the butt, and he is told to leave the firing line to go get that thing taken care of, and he says, no, sir. I am not leaving this field until I receive a more honorable wound. Of course, we don't know who he is, and we don't know if he does survive or not here. Nathaniel McLean, Ohio Brigade commander, his battle is done. He will lose over a third of his men in about 30 minutes, trying to slow down the onslaught. It's now Towers' fight, followed by Colts, and the next Union Brigade will be under the command of Stiles. And when we're going down here a little bit farther, we'll stop about halfway. There's a couple little markers like this because it looks down into a very nice deep gully, and that's where we want to stop because immediate to your left will be the guns, 5th Maine Light under Captain Lepian, and they have a good view all the way back here to the Chinn house for the next little vignette that's going to unfold as Towers' men are being pushed off this fight. One little other tidbit that's going to come into play is the command of Lieutenant Colonel Fletcher Webster, 12th Massachusetts. They will deploy basically down this slope looking that way. When we get down there farther, I'm going to make mention of Fletcher Webster again, and I do have a picture for that officer and a couple other officers that are going to be of note. So that's how we are now starting. So we're past the 5:30 time frame. We're starting to swing up toward that 6 o'clock hour.
It almost seems like they're rounds.
They could be.
How did they manage to get out?
Well, the hitting at the beginning is driving them back. You can see the two guns there. Napoleon's Captain Lepian. He brings 5 guns to the fight. And what we also found out about 4 or 5 years ago, that Captain Lepian is not in command. We also previously were interpreting that there were 6 guns in this battery. And just as fate would have it, and just why you probably want to start going to garage sales and little estate sales, somebody ran across a little diary. And in that diary tells the story of the 5th Maine Light Artillery. It says that Captain Lepian is sick. He's not in command at the Battle of 2nd Manassas. It's Lieutenant Twidball, something like that. And they don't have 6 guns. Their battery is short one because they lost a gun down around the Rappahannock River during the early part of the campaign. So, correction to interpretation right there. But we do know they deploy on that little ridge right there because Towers puts them there as his men rush forward through the fence. Now they are being driven back until they start to pass through the guns and so forth. During this fighting backwards, withdrawal, stubborn retreat, heavy fighting, Lieutenant Colonel Fletcher Webster is going to be shot off his horse. The bullet will rupture his femoral artery, and his men will take him beyond the guns, and when we get farther down there, you'll see a rock monument off in there, and that's where Colonel Webster will pass away. Who is Colonel Webster? It's this man right here. He is the oldest son of the great Massachusetts Senator Daniel Webster. And it is Daniel Webster during the secession crisis who will challenge the Southerners. Holding, all right. Who says the Union now and forever. That's about 1859 is when all this is starting to happen. So he will lose his oldest son out here on the plains of Manassas. Another officer is Colonel Joseph McLean, no relation to the Ohio McLean, of the 88th Pennsylvania. This man right here. His name was basically Old Joe, Papa Joe type of deal. The accounts say that he was extremely well liked by his troops. Those of you up close, if you look into this man's eyes and his face, it will tell you a story. This man fought during the 7 days battles around Richmond. About a week prior to this fight, he will write a letter to his wife. And he will say, though I am not dead, we must look into the necessary arrangements. I love you with all my heart. Please take care of my kids. Colonel McLean will be killed down here in this valley. His body was never recovered. So his premonition that many officers, many soldiers will have did come true here on the plains of Manassas. What is now about to happen is one of the other stories that comes into great play. If I don't want to screw up the quotes here, so if you forgive me for reading from an actual words. Because now Montgomery Course's Virginians are now smelling blood, so to speak. They're driving the Union soldier, and now they see the guns. And of course, in the Civil War, if you can overrun an enemy artillery battery, that's a great honor. So here they are. Here they come, the Virginians. Sergeant Edward Compton, Washington Grays, Company B, 7th Virginia Infantry. When we got near the Chinn house and within 200 yards of the battery, Jenkins, South Carolina Brigade, who was fighting in our front, had given way. Jenkins Brigade will come into the fight down in the valley, and they start to get swamped by some additional Union troops. They kind of get themselves caught into a little pocket and get a double crossfire in the trees that are extended over that way. Has given way and come back, unfortunately created no excitement and immediately was in perfect order. The prettiest I saw on the field of battle. Now we had a fence to climb. Overcourse galloped down the line saying, men, don't shoot, hold your fire until you get close to them. It was a trying thing to do, but the men obeyed the order. My company was immediately in front of the battery. I could see right into the muzzle of one of the brass guns. I saw them load it and return the rammer. But fortunately for us, we reached the lowest place in the land between the house and the battery just as they fired. The grape and canister passed over our heads, and before they could reload, we were among them and relieved them of their guns. The other one comes from Private John Dooley, also known as Jack Dooley, observing Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Skinner, 1st Virginia Infantry. Lieutenant Colonel Skinner is on horseback, leading his 1st Virginians. As the line reaches the guns, John Dooley has already been wounded, and he finds himself among the guns and broken caissons and the bleeding horses, the dead and dying cannoneers. And Colonel Skinner, who had ridden into the guns, carrying a French heavy cavalry saber, swings it above his head, decapitates a Union cannoneer, kills 2 others before he is being shot 3 times, one taking off part of his ear, and returns through. Jack, said he, bear witness that I was the first on the battery. Now, Colonel Skinner is a very interesting man. He survives the 3 wounds. This is his last fight, however. He will be medically discharged by the Army of Northern Virginia, and he will live until the 1900s. Now, what's interesting about him is the French cavalry saber that he is carrying. He was in Paris in around the 1830 time frame, and that was about the time of the Parisian revolts. While he was there, he had the great honor to meet the Marquis de Lafayette. The Marquis, being greatly impressed with the young man, presented him with a French heavy cavalry saber that he carried into the fight here. So now the guns of the 5th Maine have been relieved. This is where I said the flag was hanging limp. That's why we know there's no wind. And the guns now become the target of repeated attacks by the Union reinforcements and the Confederates coming wave upon wave, back and forth. The next and final stop of this program will be at the sycamore tree. There is a bench there, and amongst the guns, we will now kind of put it together and prepare you for the 7 o'clock program, the Fighting to Save John Pope. Union soldiers to the little gap in the trees, which of course is not there in 1862. The last Union reinforcements come up, form line of battle this way, and they try to drive. They do drive back, temporarily gain the guns. The Confederates bring up another brigade and hammer them back, driving them back down through here and take finally possession of Chinn Ridge. 90 minutes to take Chinn Ridge. 5 to 6:30 p.m. is what we're estimating for taking possession. 90 minutes for John Pope to start transferring artillery, infantry to Henry Hill. That way, less than a quarter mile away, Henry Hill, the objective. The end result here is that between the 6:30 and 7 o'clock time frame, the Confederates have driven all the way down the spine of this ridge. If you follow the normal spine of the terrain, it's going to drop you off right at the Stonehouse intersection. So during this little, as they get it controlled and they chase the remnants up, the brigade commanders, regimental commanders, disengage, reorganize, and now they finally fully shift the full 90 degrees. D.R. Jones's people start to arrive on the field, and they will take over part of the front line fighting along Sudley Road. Around 4:45, 5 o'clock in the evening, the last division that Robert E. Lee has, R.H. Anderson, which is positioned at Bronner Farm, will be personally released by order of Robert E. Lee. They will follow in the wake, and they will come through and they start to extend the Confederate battle line along the Sudley Road and hanging a right towards the community college. So if you came in from 66, you kind of start forming through that commercial area, the Cracker Barrel, the community college, the hotel. They start swinging around that way. The left beak starts to become engaged, and that's where I'll leave it. But they're starting to work around trying to get that. The other thing that does happen here in the evening, there will be a cavalry fight at a place called Portici there on your maps. That it's between a Union Brigade commander by the name of John Buford and a small brigade of Confederate cavalry. Jeb Stuart's not personally in command, but it's one of his subordinates, and they will have, at the time, the largest cavalry fight of the war. About 5,000-6,000 troopers engaging along I-66 and Portici. And eventually, the Union troopers will be pushed back, and the Southerners will take Balls Ford and Lewis Ford. That leaves the Stone Bridge as the only avenue truly escape for John Pope's army, and that's where I'll leave it so I don't get into it. 90 minutes, John Pope will get here because he forgot about the warnings that he was getting for the last day and a half by his subordinate officers. Men will pay for that price up here on Chinn Ridge. The rock monument is to Lieutenant Colonel Fletcher Webster. And the more recent monument that just appeared here on the field about mid-July is to the Texas Brigade, erected by the state of Texas, right over there. That's the most recent monument that's been put out here on the field. With that, the fighting at Chinn Ridge is essentially over because the next fighting is going into the 7 o'clock program, the fighting along Sudley Road, Henry Hill, or as I call it, the save John Pope's bacon, because he failed to understand the intelligence and the situation that he was getting into and disregarding. Are there any questions, folks?
What were the casualties?
In the 4 hours of fighting for James Longstreet, he is going to lose almost 4,800 men killed, wounded, and missing. Wow. And if it's 25 or 28,000, it depends on which sources that we're going for. For the comparison, Stonewall Jackson, he has about 24,000 over 3 days. He's going to lose just about 4,400 killed, wounded, and missing over the 3 days. So about 4,800 Confederate casualties in the 4 hours that it'll take here to seize Chinn Ridge and start driving on Henry Hill.
Question about the Texas monument. Other than the 5th Texas, which you said got down into the stone house area, why put the Texas monument here so